a talk like this evening is not given for the sake of imparting information, giving a lecture or an inspiring type of sermon. But it is an hour or so of intense questioning. Questioning, looking, listening together. Where one person happens to be the one who talks out loud, thinks aloud, looks and questions aloud. But it is the same process. That can go on in everyone here. Not a process of assimilating information, comparing it, holding on to it, but to move along, to move with the inquiry. Not just interpreting the words intellectually, connecting them up with associations. But to look within oneself, whether it can be seen what the words are pointing at, are coming from. So that maybe there can be understanding of oneself as one listens. I'll read 2 short excerpts from a letter received a while ago. The person who wrote the letter gave permission for this letter to be used in any way. This person writes, I was a parole agent for the state for 15 years. I was manager of the San Francisco parole office, and a young man, psychotic on amphetamines, attacked some of my staff. When he was finally subdued, 6 of us were hurt, and my clavicle was torn loose from the sternum. He was unharmed, in parentheses. Anyway, I ended up with a partially paralyzed arm, a lot of pain, and a very early retirement. I've had 1 surgery already, and as you know, a variety of specialists are now trying to figure out how to put Humpty Dumpty together again in a 2nd surgery. My problem is pain, and time and waiting, wondering when there is so little I can control in my previously very tidy life. Much of the time I can do nothing but wait, and feel commensurately worthless. Most of all, I am weary of being in pain, and wonder deeply if it has any meaning at all. When I was a Catholic and a nun for 4 years, we talked about offering it up And later in Buddhism, one talks of transferring merit. Is there merit in suffering? Lately, we have had many friends with tragedies in their lives, including AIDS, drug addiction, paralysis, and so forth. I find myself wanting to lessen their pain by offering up my own. But is this possible? Is it real? If so, I will complain no more. The fact of suffering is, of course, a noble truth, in quotation marks, but what does that really mean? What does it mean in relation to compassion, to despair? There are several questions raised by this person. One is there any merit in suffering? If there is such a thing, can that merit be offered up for the sake of others? To lessen their pain and suffering? Then a quotation, actually it's a partial quotation, that suffering is a noble truth, referring to a statement made by the Buddha. About 4 noble truths, not just the noble truth of suffering. That's the one that's most often quoted or sticks in the mind most and is used a lot, that all life is suffering. But this went along with 3 other noble truths, that there is a cause for our suffering, a reason for it. And that there is a way out of suffering, and a description of that. So here, in mentioning this noble truth of suffering, the person says, but what does this really mean? What does it mean, all life is suffering? The truth of suffering. What does it mean? What is its relationship to compassion and to despair? We can add a simple question: what does it mean to suffer? Which is different from what is the meaning of suffering. What does it mean, I suffer, when we say that? Can one, in inquiring into this, abstain from already having answers? One may have thought about this a lot and arrived at answers, at conclusions. But that would end any new and fresh inquiry, wouldn't it? This person says, is there any merit in suffering? I've heard it in one religion, that one can offer up one's suffering for others, and then in another religion, that there is merit in suffering which can be offered up for the sake of others. What does that mean? And here, the question, what does it mean, is not asking for philosophical reflection, but for looking within oneself. When there is this desire, or hope, or comfort in the idea of merit in suffering. It is a comforting idea, isn't it? That when I suffer, while I suffer, I may gain something in the process. A certain bargaining. I'll go through this and in the course of it accumulate something that will benefit me later. Maybe such a thought can give some zest to suffering. And as this person herself says, if this was possible to transfer the merits to others who are suffering, then I would not complain anymore. And here too we have to ask, is the idea that others may benefit from my suffering, the possibility of transferring merit to others, is that idea a comfort, a relief to oneself? Is it entertained, the hope entertained in order to relieve or diminish one's own suffering? One cannot assume that wanting to suffer for the sake of others is an altruistic thing. We like to believe that and stop questioning and go on believing. But one can inquire whether there is not self-interest in this wanting to transfer the merit to others, the self-interest of diminishing one's own suffering, one's own pain, through the whatever energy is generated by the idea of doing this for the sake of others. One cannot settle whether this is so or not by arguing about it. One has to look what thoughts come up, what feelings and sensations come up when ideas are entertained. No one has to do this. This is up to each one of us to scrutinize our ideas and the effect that they have on our feelings and emotions. And whether we cling to these ideas for the sake of the effect that they have on our feelings and emotions, energy, outlook. Not saying this is right or wrong, but to examine and inquire and find out what is actually happening. as one entertains thoughts or hopes of gaining merit through suffering, can one be completely with that suffering? Or as part of the attention diverted into the thought about future gain, future results and effects, which is not undivided attention to what is actually going on. And does the idea that present suffering will bring future merit, relief, gain, does that clinging or attaching to that idea and the effects that it has on one's mental, physical feelings, does that help to understand why one is suffering in the first place? Or does it again distract understanding, attention from that very question, why do I suffer? Please, we have to look at this. We don't have to, but we can. All of us suffer. In the course of one day, so many sufferings over how one is talked to, treated, pains that one has. In this case here, it is physical pain, but it is probably much more than that. One can just put oneself into the position of this person in the course of the job, maybe having put a lot of care and energy, many years, hard work, working with people, and all of a sudden being attacked and injured for life. While the one who did the attack, who did the injury, inflicted the injury, went unharmed. 6 of us hurt, but the one who did it unharmed. Can one see how one would feel in a case like that? The question that comes up immediately is, why me? What did I do to deserve that? And with the question, why me? The almost inevitable self-pity. I'm not saying this is wrong or right or justified or unjustified. If one feels that this is being said, please let us see that this is being added. This is not said. We're looking at it. We're not saying one should not feel sorry for oneself, or one has a right to feel sorry for oneself. We're just looking at the emergence of self-pity when one asks, why me? Why should I suffer? Why not someone else? Why are others better off than I am? I am worse off than others. Why? And the feelings that come with that question of feeling sorry for oneself, and the feelings that come with feeling sorry for oneself. There's a tremendous pain and anguish and anger in self-pity, isn't there? It is like a pit into which one has dug oneself, which is so hard to get out of as long as the thoughts that produce it keep going around and round and round. In the case of this person who, as she writes, was a Catholic nun for 4 years and I think an ordained person of a Buddhist center for 9 years, still wonders whether there is any merit in suffering. She has not subscribed to belief in it. It's a question with her. Is there any merit in suffering? Can my suffering relieve yours? And his and hers? Because I suffer today, am I wiser tomorrow? More loving? Compassionate? I remember from years back when I was in my early teens, struggling with this question of transfer, of merit as it is called here. At that time I underwent a year's preparation for confirmation in the Lutheran Church. Which involved once a week or twice a week instructions in catechism and Bible study with the Lutheran minister of the church in which I was to be confirmed. There was quite an ardent religious feeling in me. I don't quite remember of what I was feeling ardent about, but I wanted to feel ardent about religion. There was a lot of idea involved in that. And yet what was being presented did not make sense, at least not all of it. And what I stumbled over was that Jesus, by being crucified, was to have taken upon himself our sin, my guilt, my suffering. By dying on the cross, I was to be relieved of it. But I could not verify that. It wasn't so. I felt guilt and intense suffering over the situation in which I found myself. And looking around the incredible suffering of war times, or was it? No, it was already war times in Germany. There seemed to be no evidence to me that there had been any effect of this man taking upon himself the suffering and sin of the world. It seemed to be rampant. I just could not understand what was meant. And asking the minister about it was no help. He refused to answer. He didn't want to enter into this, and just recommended faith. Can anyone relieve another of suffering through suffering himself or herself? I think in order to answer that or understand that question, we have to ask, what is suffering? What do I mean when I say I'm suffering? Here in this letter, some intense physical pain is mentioned. Having physical pain, is that suffering? Of course, we have to agree on how we use the word. If we say, I use the word suffering, physical pain, to mean feeling it completely, intensely, deeply, without any separation. I don't think this is how we use the word suffering. I think the word suffering always implies something extra, doesn't it? At least let's use it this way here so we don't confuse each other. To have a clavicle bone torn from the sternum, paralysis in the arm, and all the pain that's caused by this throughout the organism. Can that just be what it is? I don't think we've ever approached pain in that manner. Have we? Do we? Or is there always a reflection upon it going along with the pain? The reflection that I am suffering this pain, that there is someone there who has this pain, upon whom it is inflicted or has been inflicted, who has to cope with it, overcome it. Or yield to it. We take this for granted because this is how we express it, this is how our language expresses it. But with this way of conceptualizing it goes a deep-seated feeling of a separate me. that has pain, but really should not or need not or could overcome it. Or is suffering it unjustifiably, unfairly, undeservedly. When these thoughts circulate in the brain, the pain that is there becomes aggravated, complicated, and added to. There is the new pain of conflict with what is, the anger that arises from it, the resentment, despair. Will it ever end, that reflection? Will I ever be free of it? And the pain of that thought, I may never be free of it. It may last all my life. And then again the anger, the pain of anger, and then the conflict with a new physical state that is being experienced. I don't want to feel this way. How can I be free of it? How can I get rid of it? Or what use is it? Could at least I make some sense of it? Maybe it's if I only knew it was good for me. All of this has nothing to do with the pure sensation of what's there. And we don't know what's there because we embellish it, trim it, complicate it with all of our reactions and feelings and ideas about it. So we don't know what pure pain is, which is not suffered by a separate entity. In thought. You can say, well, wait a minute, there is a separate entity. There's me who has that pain. That pain is happening to me. But what is that? As one says that, the pain is a fact. It's palpable, maybe debilitating. But it's happening to me is a thought, isn't it? And why did it happen to me is another thought. It needn't have happened to me, or it shouldn't have happened to me, are more thoughts. Do you see that? Can one observe that? As it happens, day in and day out, with physical and mental pain suffered, Suffered by whom? And then with the suffering, the desire to rid oneself of it, to be free of it. All of it not exploring what is actually there. What is this pain that's there, that is factually, actually there? If I have no reaction to it, no idea about it, don't even call it pain, because the word is loaded. Loaded with association in the brain with what is bad and undesirable or good, beneficial, good for me. And therefore all of this inhibiting or preventing a direct contact, a direct touch with what's actually there, this instant. Before the separation happens again, I have that pain and all the pain coming from that separation, all the suffering. Can one watch the separation take place? How it comes out of a moment of just being there, no one there to have it, and then the thought, I have that pain, and what arises in the mind and body with that thought which splits itself off from the actual true situation of the moment. The pain, which I don't call pain, because I don't know what it is. I don't want to know what it is. I want to find out as it's actually going on. And any idea that I have about it from the past is no help in finding out what this is now. Because it links up with all my past experiences, prejudices, and that of my parents and people who have helped me build up the idea about pain. So is it possible to give a moment's complete, undivided, purposeless attention to what's there? The language is dualistic, as though there was someone who gave attention to his pain, but in reality it isn't so. Can attention and pain be undivided, not two separate affairs? Because in truth there's no one there who attends to something he or she has. There's only what's there. And either there's attention, which is not separate from the pain, or there's thinking about it, which gives the feeling of separation, of division. And with that feeling, the suffering, more pain, more conflict, more agony, and more physical and mental symptoms. This is not proposed here as a theory. It is something to find out for oneself, to explore. A memory comes to mind. I think I once told it a while ago. We were walking through Watkins Glen, I think it was. And on the other side of of the glen, of the quite rapid river. There was a little ledge of rock, and on that was a deer, a young deer, struggling to get up. And there was a sheer cliff, very high, wooded on top, and had fallen off that cliff down to the rock ledge and broken one or two of its legs, and was trying to get up, just struggling, trying, and always flopping down again. We watched it for quite a while in its attempts to get up, and the legs giving way. When we came back up the gorge, the deer was on a lower ledge in its up and downs, and must have fallen into the river and swept on to another little plateau there. This time it wasn't trying to get up. It was lying there absolutely still. Sort of its chin on one of the legs. Just one complete, whole, whatever. I don't think that deer was suffering. There was no evidence of any thought of what had happened to me. The pity of it all. My future life as a doe. My spoiled opportunities. None of that. The animals, as far as we know, don't have that capacity to think in those terms. They can be hurt, and the attempt to get up. But when it's no longer possible, then it's no longer possible. And then there's just quiet. By this time, a couple park officials had come with a gun, and we walked on. I think understand better today the meaning of what I think has been a real misinterpretation. The meaning of that someone takes the suffering of mankind upon himself. I think the truth of what is expressed there has been misunderstood or misrepresented. The truth being that if there's no division, no feeling of a separate entity having to suffer a separate individual fate, when there is no feeling of division, the emergence of the thought I have to suffer that is seen as a thought and is understood for what it does to the mind and body, the conflict, the division, the pain, it's seen and understood. So that thought cannot dominate the mind any longer. So when there is no separation from whatever situation of pain and sorrow one may find oneself in, no separation from sorrow, pain, then it is clear that what used to be thought of as one's individual pain and sorrow is the sorrow of all human beings. Human beings have lived in sorrow and pain since time immemorial. And not just in pain, but in the suffering of it. The feeling and conviction that this is happening to me. The belief in this me. The attachment to this me. And the sorrow and suffering that flows out of the attachment to this me. That is the sorrow of all humankind. And in this sorrow, in this suffering of attachment to me, with all its expectations, all of its hopes, all of its frustrations and pains and disappointments and despairs, in that our energy is bound up, is stuck, tied up, blocked. Can that be seen? Not reflected upon, but seen. That the suffering in me is no different from the suffering in you, because as me and you, my problems as compared to yours, and our clashes. When this is understood, that there is no me to suffer, that this is idea, fiction, which causes the suffering, causes the fear, causes the division, and the sorrow that comes from division. When this is understood, what happens response to suffering. My suffering. It's not any longer tenable. Pain there may be, but that I will investigate what it really is when I don't call it pain. When there's just the sensation, the mass of sensation, devoid from any reaction to it or reflections upon it. Just the raw stuff. What is that? Bare from all thought stuff laid upon it. So can suffering end in a human being? Who sees that the suffering in herself or himself is the suffering of all human beings. The same me, here and there and everywhere. The same division. The same anger and resentment and fear and hope and belief. None of it ending suffering, but perpetuating it. Do you see that? So for even one moment at a time can suffering end in a human being. Can the feeling of me-ness be seen through, understood as it happens, its causes and its consequences, seen at a glance as it arises, out of pain. I don't want this, why me? I shouldn't, I must. I have. Can that be seen as it arises, without doing anything about it? If it is seen how it operates here in oneself, doesn't that bring about compassion for how it happens in all of us? What it does to all of us, to our relationship. As long as I'm suffering from my ailments, with a self-pity or anger, or hope and belief that may be tied up in that, can there be compassion? I don't think so. Compassion needs complete freedom. Of no attachment to all the ideas of me and mine, and you and yours. compassion actually means passion with everything that is. Not passion for or against, but passion with everything that is. Not blocked or tied up anywhere. Is that possible? For a moment at a time? We will end here for today.